You're kicked away. No.
Wait, can you grab me one?
Sure.
Thanks.
Well, they're all out. Maybe let's check over here.
Because we're supposed to check on this city. Until my eyes start
Play
reading.
sports?
She can't go.
Okay.
You can't, we tested it, so that's like basically. That was really embarrassing. Got 2 out of 10.
So that's like basically what?
They threw 10 things at me to see on my C-section. It's 2 out of 10.
It's bad.
This was not about to let a lava water bubble over my head for you to probably whack it into the side of my face. Honestly, I was gonna duck. I was just gonna duck. I was gonna throw it at me anyway.
Those are my favorite TikToks. The sounds. I think you will laugh over it. American Christmas.
Actually, yeah, you're dry now.
Turn into an infection.
Oh, dang, really?
Yeah, that's getting better. Get to your bro. Say what?
So this is why we don't dump our head under water.
Yeah, I should have gone way crazy.
Yeah, it's nice.
Went to the sauna when I had the flu and it made me feel great.
You're sweating out.
I was there too. I thought we should have. I guess he is. The sauna.
Yes. Already, yeah, I'm not gonna really else it yet.
Yeah, people have been getting sick. I just get sick in my ears.
Yeah.
Your ears got sick. Your ears got sick.
I guess.
No, ear infections have been going around.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, 'cause my roommate got one too, but I heard it's not contagious. Yeah, I haven't talked to him in a month.
What? How do you?
He died.
Are y'all like deep?
I mean, I got an ear infection from him.
You said, because you said you hadn't talked to him in a month.
Yeah.
So why haven't you talked to him?
Is this a chosen roommate
Oh,
or a
yeah.
randomly assigned one?
He had an ear infection, then I have an ear infection, so like we're kind of mixed up.
I don't understand.
Yeah, well, that was just like biology.
Yeah, but I heard it wasn't contagious.
Oh.
Hey, you guys keep talking for a second.
Okay.
How would an ear infection even be contagious?
Well, it can be a symptom of
Something else.
other kinds of viruses that can be in like your snot or whatever.
Right, the ears connect up. I know something about this. If someone, they had sinuses, who fights chronic sinus problems. It's all connected though. Sinuses connect the tubing in the ears. Stuff goes back and forth, so. It's not a closed system, the ear.
Yeah, but his nose was never near my ears, so I don't know.
But if he's breathing, I don't know.
In my ear.
Background,
In my ear.
breathing out of a mouth or nose can go into your lungs, but then go up to your
We were playing
ear,
telephone.
just like it go up to your
That'll
sinuses.
do it.
That'll do
Yeah.
it.
Let's pump it out.
We played telephone and then we went wakeboarding, so.
Double whammy.
We did this thing.
Again.
You can get the drops from CVS that have, they're like man-making ear drops.
Yeah, I just did telehealth and he prescribed me antibiotics and drugs.
Nice.
Yeah. Easy lessons. Blue Cross Blue Shield, shout out.
Yeah, I have to say, I love antibiotics.
They work pretty well.
Believe it or not, I went through a period of a couple of years, I was getting constant ear and sinus infections from 2 decades ago. I mean, it was one after the other, it was every other week. And something finally, Up till then, being like, well, let's try to see if you recover without any antibiotics.
That's rude.
After a while, it became, okay, 30 days of antibiotics. And I went through that sort of regimen, and things improved a lot. And the other trick, which is kind of icky, and my family hates it when I bring it up, like irrigation. Are you familiar?
No.
Neti pot is not the good one. Or squeeze bottle.
Yeah.
Squeeze bottle.
It sucks. Always look like they really hurt.
No, they don't hurt at all. They just feel
They don't hurt.
weird.
Yeah, they
It's
really-
painless. Just
Yeah.
feels
It's
weird.
like really uncomfortable.
Right.
It's really,
So,
But not pain, just
You feel really
discomfort.
good.
Yeah.
So I highly recommend it. In any case, sorry I'm late. It's been a crazy day. Okay, good. I didn't take my phone with me to have it ring. But I believe Christmas has come early for me this year because I believe you have given me gifts.
So I wanted some gifts for myself.
No, they're all mine. I don't want to be greedy, but I insist. I already gave you your gift, your chance to read them. When will I grade them? Good question.
no, I mean, when you grade them, you should have them graded from worst to best. Tell everybody.
So I think
Just
that,
line up.
Yep.
I think that would be neat. Yes, very
But it
good.
would be also funny.
Yeah, I used to do a thing when I do 23, 10, and 20, where you give a multiple choice test like 400 people. You got a lot of information there. And I would do like the best grade. Yeah, the top grade was 96. So with an 8-point curve, this person received 104. The lowest grade was a grade of 12, with which the 8-point curve becomes 20, a mere 4 points below random guessing. And that was always popular. So with the same name, I just make that point below random guessing.
Yeah,
Yes.
I gave a test, and it was A, B, C, and D, and 5 people put E.
Yeah, I did that option too, putting that option. So somebody else was answering questions for another faculty member who came in traumatized. Sometimes we need to sort of mutually support one another. Who asked a question about something that had happened in like the 1840s or something, and what had caused this development. The student wrote the Civil War. We do see the absurdity in there, Civil War, 1861.
I had a student write true and false next to the Scantron bubble. Yeah, that was messy.
Yeah, I could tell you stories you would not believe about 2310 land, but now is not the time. Let me plunge into business here. I have your papers. You might be thinking, when are they coming back to you? And unfortunately, my response is dawn to find out. Rest of my schedule through Friday is like beyond booked. Everything's double booked and stuff. We're going to have to try to be in 2 meetings at once. So hopefully by next Tuesday, hopefully we can deal with them over the weekend or on Monday, which right now are looking pretty promising, but stuff can happen. But as soon as I can, certainly before you go away for spring break, I know you couldn't bear to leave, right? Without
Don't make me go, don't make me go.
So, and I wouldn't want that to happen. Any questions before I jump into business here? Okay, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, we had been doing the Boston book, right? Which is a brief overview of the interaction of religion and American culture. And in terms, I just want to make this case, in presenting the Boston book, okay? In presenting it, I am not doing kind of a close analysis like I did with Tocqueville. I am skimming and hitting high points. That may cause the lecture kind of to flow a little bit awkwardly at times and not quite to gel together because I don't have time to connect every single dot. And I would just so just be patient in that regard. I hate teaching this way, but I got to get through this thing. Because the students last time I taught this said, just go through Marsden at breakneck speed, that'll do it. So that's what I'm trying to do. Make sure if you're going to write on Marsden, because eventually there'll be writing opportunities, make sure you've really read it carefully. I'm hitting kind of high points. Under each high point, there's like 5 small points. I'm not talking about the small points, I'm more or less hitting the major points in this outline. Okay? So we started the overall theme of the book, Protestantism, Pluralism, and Secularization. America begins as an almost entirely Protestant country. From the very beginning, it has different types of Protestants. And by the time it's been around, for time settlers have been on the east coast of North America for 50 years, 100 years, there are so many different types of Protestant, it's hard to keep track of them. Hard to come up with a complete list. Lots and lots of different variations on the theme of Protestantism. And finally, the theme of secularization, you might say de-religionization, pushing religion out of the public square or marginalizing its role in the public square, making it much less central to America's self-understanding and American life. We began with those fun-loving guys, the Puritans, right? And a couple points on them. They came over here. They're deeply religious people who risked their lives and the lives of their families to come to this new world for religious reasons. They came committed to building a truly godly church and a truly godly society, a city on a hill. We can be an example to the world that can look up and see this is what God wants. Or if we screw this up, we can be an example to the world of people who utterly failed and betrayed the ideals that we profess to embrace. They came here with a sense of mission, and that is one of the aspects of Puritanism that has continued to be part of America's cultural DNA. The idea of a chosen nation, the ideal of an exceptional nation, a different nation from all the others, in some ways special. The idea of a chosen people set aside by God for a special mission in the world, or as the Puritans would have called it, set aside by God for an errand in the wilderness. We're sent off to this wilderness on this mission for God. This sense of chosenness continues as a feature of America's political consciousness, some other things that would carry on from there. Perhaps most importantly, the idea of covenant. The idea of covenant features prominently in the Old and New Testaments, one of the central themes. It features prominently in the Puritan understanding of founding and organizing a particular church. A covenant isn't just kind of like a contract, like we could written or unwritten, I'm going to pay Max $50 to mow my yard next week. It is a serious, solemn commitment, even more solemn than the marriage covenant. It is an agreement between people and God, your people and God. And the people make a serious commitment to obey and follow God, to be true to Him. True to Him. And God in turn makes a promise back. If you uphold your end of the covenant, I will bless you and take care of you and guide you. So the notion of a covenantal nation, that's just like they borrow their city governance from their church charter, this idea of covenant spills over here from religion into the political realm. Other key ideas, individualism. Okay, Protestantism tends to be a very individualistic religion. That's one of the things that separates itself from Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy. They are much more community focused. the community and authority within the community looms large Protestant thing. Every man his own priest. We can all read our Bible and figure out what God wants for us. Problems ensue though when we all read our Bible and come with different clashing answers. That proves to be a difficulty. But emphasis on individualism, individual independent thought, individuals charting their own course, and then finally an emphasis on equality. Puritan churches were very egalitarian in their church governance. Everyone gets a say. Or in early America, something happens in the early 1700s, something around 1720, different historians date it differently, running up to circa 1860, although again, some historians would say 1865 or 1855. We don't need to be bothered with that. Roughly 1720 to 1760, the Great Awakening. I'm tempted to read you some passages on that because it's so important, and I suppose I will. I'm weak. I shouldn't read this, but I know you guys look forward to the dramatic reading. I'm on page 29. I'm actually up on page 29. First full paragraph on the page, talking about the European background of this. German Moravians came to the New World to settle and evangelize. These groups attempted to renew churches by emphasizing the individual's personal relationship with God and vigorous evangelizing with the necessity of being converted or born again. These emphases today usually known as evangelical found fertile soil in 18th century American Puritanism with its emphasis on individual conversion. The Awakening brought many versions of such emphasis to the colonies on a large scale. And there's more on this. It goes on for that whole page. And top of the next page, I'll let you do that for yourselves. You haven't talked about it. Wandering preachers, they evangelize not for Lutheranism or Episcopalianism. They evangelize for Christianity, a generic kind of Christianity. They don't associate themselves with any particular denomination. They have a very emotional form of preaching, which is, again, unusual in those days. People who experienced it was dramatically different from what they were used to. Very emotional, lots of hymn singing, tears, altar calls, things like that. And although they, the initial evangelists of the First Great Awakening, were very educated guys, they didn't bring that to bear really in their preaching. They tried to keep their preaching as simple as possible and aimed at the heart rather than at the head. The other big event in that America, the Enlightenment, right? Enlightenment is again a thing you could teach a whole course on and barely scratch the surface. When I was in graduate student, the first course I took was the Enlightenment. So the very first course I took, it might be the best class I had in my years in graduate school. I cannot possibly do it justice here, but the proponents of the Enlightenment are people who believe in reason with a capital R. They believe we can use reason to address our problems. We can use reason to address our needs. Up till now, people have trusted to tradition. They've trusted to authority. Reason needs to be thrust center stage. And they have a particular understanding of reason we don't have a lot of time to go into. But if you took the liberalism course, that kind of mathematical conception of reason that Sprague's talked about in that book. They believe this new reason would revolutionize the world. It would put an end to poverty. It would put an end to disease. It would put an end to hunger. It would put an end to injustice and oppression. It would make the world a radically better place. It would change human life very dramatically for the better. Now, you would think that these Enlightenment guys and the Great Awakening guys, or more broadly the American Protestants, would be enemies, but at this point, competitors fighting for men's souls. At this point in time, they were not. They considered themselves allies. They had a lot of common ground. Above all, the common ground was moral. They championed the same moral code. As the book talks about, some of the Enlightenment types might say you can figure out this moral code using reason, you don't need anything else. Others might say, no, you need the Bible to tell you what's right from wrong. But no matter which route they take, reason or scripture, they tend to get to almost exactly the same place. The Enlightenment types are big fans of modern science. They see that as putting reason to work right through technology in the service of mankind. And many of these Protestant preachers are huge fans of natural science and its possibilities. So they're, at the beginning, allies, and America becomes a land of dissenters. There are many different versions of Protestantism. You have these Enlightenment guys on the side, most of whom profess to be Christians, a few of whom don't. But they agree on something important. Over and above, I mentioned morality. But beyond that, they agree in dissenting from British order. They don't want America made in the image of England. They think England is a flawed model. We need to get away from that. Don't emulate them. Run from them. So America is a land of people unhappy with England. And that kind of points your way towards the American Revolution. Because if they start unhappy, what's it going to be like when England starts hassling them and making more demands on that? So you have that going on. You move to the next period, right? 1800 to 1860. It's, again, the Great Awakening 2, the Great Awakening on steroids, right? Even bigger, and with the characteristics even more intensified. And the Great Awakening has a huge impact on American culture. One writer said of the history, you would know who he is, but he was a very famous historian of American religion in his day. I read his books when I was younger and had time for such enjoyable activities. But one of, I would say, was the history of America during this period is simply a history of revival meetings. That's the big thing to understand America. That's where you have to go, because it really changes people. Effects of it, it creates a lot of impetus for social reform. Temperance movement comes out of this, women's rights, abolitionism. The Second Great Awakening feeds into all these things. And of course, education. These guys are big on schools, they're big on colleges. Why are they so big on education? Primarily for religious reasons. They wanted godly people, they wanted people who are well educated, who can read and understand the Bible, who can interpret it properly. So the whole educational system is suffused for religion. It's not just that's the most important course on Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays during your day. That plays a role in every course. Other things going on in this day, again, this is all by way of review, I believe. The emergence of Catholicism, its early emergence as a force on the American scene. An emergence that's very controversial and very divisive, having trouble figuring out how these people fit into what we're doing here in America. if the American project is to build a Protestant democracy, what the heck are we going to do with these other people who aren't Protestants and we're not sure if they believe in democracy? They are strangers and outsiders coming from a different tradition, and that leads, as we said last time, to some riots, some burnings, leads to the emergence of political parties, becomes a big voting issue at several points, variations of the Know-Nothing Party achieve control over state governments. And the other thing going on religiously here, harkening back to Tocqueville, you remember, there's transcendentalism. I won't say more about this because we just discussed it under Tocqueville. But let's pause just for 1 second to return to Tocqueville. Is that good, Isabel?
Big fan.
Big fan, okay. This is the era when Tocqueville's there. He arrives like smack dab in the middle of this stuff. Seeing what he sees, what are some of his predictions? Pantheism will grow. I'm stunned to find these pantheists in America. They're the transcendentalists. There's only a handful of them. You probably, you couldn't fill a teaching theater with their numbers. Okay? But almost all of them are intellectuals teaching at the more prestigious universities, school teachers. They're in a position, think of the name, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry Thoreau. We still read them today. They're major intellectual figures with a big cultural influence. Likewise, his discussion of enthusiasm and periodic outbursts of intense religiosity. He's watching the Second Great Awakening. He's attending camp meetings and trying to make sense out of this phenomenon. Why are these people doing that at best? What is this exactly? We don't do this in France. Okay? So now we move to the period of 1860s to 1917. What is there to say in here? Well, America pre-Civil War thought of itself as a Protestant nation. And not just a Protestant nation, it thought of itself as the Protestant nation, the numero uno Protestant nation. We're number one. Okay, we enjoy leadership of the Protestant world, and all the other Protestant nations are following after us, inspired by our example, and whatnot. That self-understanding, by and large, still holds. And again, we talk about some of the churches going up all over the place. Somebody stood up and said, religion's dying in America. Somebody else read the excerpt. He talks about, well, that's funny because we're founding a new church every day. And he was a Methodist. We Methodists open a new church every day. That doesn't sound like we're dying, does it? America remains this Protestant nation. But we're beginning to see cracks in the edifice. It is facing challenges that it's not sure what to do about, challenges that it's not sure how to meet. First of these challenges is wealth. America is becoming a very wealthy country. And you might, so much, isn't that such a good thing? That money brings with it certain temptations. That's an old biblical theme, right? Wealth is dangerous. It can easily have a bad spiritual effect. Easier, right, for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven than a camel to pass through an eye of a needle. That's moderated somewhat the eye of the needle with the door, but it was a low door. So you'd have to unload all the wealth to squeeze your camel through. It couldn't carry anything in through. So now you have all this wealth. Wealth, it creates all new temptations. All new sorts of temptations. Remember, these people remember our friend consumerism and stuff. Back in the old day, there wasn't a lot to buy. I'm going to add a half acre to my field. I'll be wealthier and more successful, to be able to live more comfortably with the office. But now, you know, there are a lot of much more superficially attractive, at least, options. So this vast wealth leads to a kind of a culture of fun and entertainment and things like that. Next thing we have is all tied together and connected with this wealth, we might say, industrialization, mass production, urbanization. Industrialization, mass production, urbanization. It's not only that we have access to all these material goods that we didn't have before. I mean, unimaginably, explosively more. Imagine you're sitting in your log cabin in the year 1868, and you're looking forward to the next week. You're going to take your buggy and go into town on Saturday with the family into the general store. And the general store is about the size of this room, and what are you going to buy? Well, they offer either work pants or dress pants. I'll take a pair of work pants. I'll take a new shovel. That might be cool. Does this sound like a fun shopping expedition? Right. Imagine you're sitting out in your little log cabin with your general store. One day, you discover something in the U.S. Post Office, in the U.S. Postal Service, a catalog with the name on it of a company you've never heard of. Catalog that's 300 pages long, and it's just jammed full with advertising for various things you could buy that have to be shipped to you, and this would take months, but you can get them now. It opens possibilities you didn't have before. Hey, I'm not limited to brown and black pants. Cool. I got another option here. But over and above that, it introduced, instead of offering the choice of 2 types of shovels, I get 15. But now it offers you things you never even heard of, things you never even dreamed of. This is kind of a really big experience. This cornucopia of options, of possibilities, of goods, and having the money to pursue them now, because people are living a little wealthier. Okay? And they're also, because they're living a little better, they have a little more leisure, so not only do they have money to buy this stuff, they have more time to enjoy it. And this new mode of production brings people together in cities, creates huge factories, things that didn't really exist before. There were factories before, but they might have a dozen people in them. Now you have factories with 500 people or 1,000 people in it. You're moving into the world of mass production. And you're living in these big urban areas which are nothing like your little town was. They look nothing like it. Everything is different. All the old rules and customs go out the window in this new environment. You're not a country farmer anymore. You're not getting up before dawn to milk the cow and then getting the kids up to grab the eggs. It is a whole new and different world, and this is shocking. It shakes people out of routine. It shakes them out of their customary habits of action, things they did automatically, things they did because everyone does. That's what you do in our little town. It really, really shakes things up. And we talked about the depersonalization of economic life. I wanted to read you something on that. I don't think I read it last time because I was hurrying. Page 106. Third line on the page. If I read this to you, stop me, because I thought I skipped it, but maybe I read it. Business is a realm that tends to have a logic of its own, built upon the principle of maximizing profits.
Yeah, you read it.
Okay, I read. So go through that, and then and go to the next paragraph, which I'm pretty sure I didn't read. You'll have stopped me, Isabel, if I did. In addition to mere greed, however, more fundamental changes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll now go down to the bottom of the page. I'm going to get you. We're in a 4th line from the bottom. It talks about a less personalized entity. Talks in that paragraph about the depersonalization of economics. Up to now, all the business you did was with people you knew, people you went to church with, people you were probably friendly with, people your kids went to school with. Now you're interacting with strangers. An example I gave last class, if I remember right, is in the old days, you go into the store, and if general store, if you didn't have money, they knew you, you knew them. Hey, here's what I need, I'll pay you at harvest time. And, you know, thumbs up, we're all friends here, handshake deal. Now you're going into a building that buys stuff that's 50 times larger than your old general store, that you know none of the people who are employed there. You've never even heard the name of the owners. And if the owners live 1,000 miles away, and they own 20 things just like this, planted at different locations. Economic life becomes increasingly transactional, separated increasingly from friendship and whatnot. Okay, and so that creates a different world. Next, I know what, this is something I know I didn't do last time because I jotted it down in my notes that to do this time. One of the few things I made a note that I didn't cover. Henry Adams. That probably doesn't ring a bell at all, but he was there in the book. Henry Adams was an American historian. He's part of a very important American family, is he not? The Adamses, remember that? They produced...
Yeah,
Shame on you, shame. That's a cheap shot. One of America's leading families, people who were key figures in the Revolution and whatnot. Trying to find the page here. I wanted to read you. Okay, now Henry Adams is the grandson of a president and the great-grandson of a president. Pretty impressive, so. But he doesn't go into politics. As a matter of fact, the book doesn't mention this, but he writes a novel that's not real great as a novel. I have read it, at least in my view. But it's an attack on American politics in that era, saying America's been corrupted, there's so much graft, there's so much stupidity, something has gone wrong with our democracy. The title of the book, Democracy. Okay. In that case, he also wrote a book called, and the one that he's famous for today, called The Education of Henry Adams. Adams is an intellectual. He became professor at Harvard. Famous historian. He wrote like a 20-volume history of, I think it was the Jefferson and Madison administrations, something like that. I can't pull it out. God, I'm getting old. But anyway, The Education of Henry Adams is about kind of learning how the world works as he goes through life, figuring things out. And one of the sections of that book is very famous. It's called The Virgin and the Dynamo. The Virgin and the Dynamo. Okay? He takes us to an American city and says, kind of look at the skyline of our city here. What is the most striking things we see in the skyline? Buildings, right? We see skyscrapers, these really tall buildings that are engineering marvels. 100 years before, they didn't have the engineering talent to build them, and now they can. You see giant factories and stuff. That's what dominates your field of vision, our apex achievement. That's what we put our resources into. These huge skyscrapers, these huge factories. He says, that tells you something about who we are and what we and what really matters to us in practice. Then he looks at old European cities. And the thing that dominates the skyline is not a skyscraper, they don't have any. It's not a factory, no factories to be found there, at least yet. What you see is a church, a cathedral. Many of the churches and cathedrals are considered among the great accomplishments in terms of architectural design and beauty. People go to study them as some of the most magnificent artistic achievements in all of human history. And you look at that and he thinks, how the hell did they do this? Okay, this thing would have cost a fortune. What do you say, skyscraper factories cost a fortune? We're rich. They're poor. They're impoverished people that can't even afford shoes. These people are absolutely impoverished. They're going hungry. They're malnourished. But somehow, they produce this. What does that tell us about them? And what they thought mattered, and what they thought was important. And he offers you there a vision, and he's not taking sides necessarily, of just two different approaches to civilization. One focused on industry, the conquering of nature, the improvement of a human life in a material way, conquering disease, letting people live comfortably, making sure everyone has a lot of food. And then another civilization dedicated to prayer and worship. And the context is he's meditating. America, right, we're the great Protestant country. We are a religious people. We say that all the time, and people who study us say, yeah, they're a religious people. That's true. But what the heck is going on here? These skyscrapers, these factories, suggest we might not be as religious a people as we thought. Or it may suggest our religion is passing away, and our energy and money and resources and time and work and love go elsewhere. He asked us to meditate on this new world that has emerged in the aftermath of the Industrial Revolution. Now I'm going to cycle back to Luke here. Simply put his finger up to get my attention a while ago, and I told him I'd get to him, and I ignored him. My apologies.
That's fine.
When you get old, you forget stuff.
Well, mine's kind of off topic now. That's what I was going to talk about.
Well, do you want to do it or not? If you feel strong, then we go off topic.
No, it's fine.
Okay. I'm still going to open my Coke. I was going to wait while you were talking to get a drink. So you have that. Henry, you have that part of America. Then you have growing pluralism in America. And again, we discussed this last time. We flew sort of into it. I want to add a few of the details. The first and most notable sign of a newfound pluralism, is Catholicism. There's also at this point, a significant Jewish immigration, but the Catholic immigration is much, much larger. At this point, Catholics are probably about 15% of the population. Jews are probably about 1%. And both have a bullet there. They're both rapidly increasing. And that old question that was lurking before remains. What do we do with these people? How do these people fit in? Okay? The immediate reaction is, okay, they're coming over here. We'll just make them good American Protestants. And that's one of the impetuses for the public schools and for required school attendance. We have to take all these Catholics and Jews, people who believe in these crazy things, and we need to teach them to think like we do, good Protestant Democrats. We need to make good Americans out of them, which means Protestants. Okay? Now, these, confronted with this trend, of course, the culture is generally hostile to them. They're not real welcome. What is the response to this? On the Jewish side, first because it's a little easier. Protestantism dominates all the institutions. That's just our Protestant churches, the schools, even if not Protestant in name or effectively Protestant, the colleges are Protestant, the hospitals are Protestant, the orphanages are Protestant. You go right down the list. That makes them extremely uncomfortable if you were a Jew or Catholic, especially since it comes with all this pressure that you feel like, you're sort of made feel like you don't belong here. You certainly realize you don't quite fit in with all these other people. How do you react to that? The Jews pursued a strategy of, this is by and large, we're generalizing obviously, of secularization. They would participate in those institutions, sign me up, but they would push to make them less Protestant. They constantly struggled to de-Protestantize, reduce the Protestant content, make it to be something where they can fit in more easily. And that, on one level that was hard to do, but it might not be as hard to do as it sounds, because in this period the Protestants are saying, they're describing these Protestant institutions as simply Christian institutions. They're not really Protestant, they're Christian. Trying to downplay in their PR the Protestant character of it with these people, because you hold up a banner and say, come join our Protestant institutions, you're not going to do a lot of business from these immigrants. The Jews sort of try to enter into these institutions and change them from within. That's a long-term process, but that was the strategy they settled on. And they could do that to some degree in the areas where they had a very high concentration of Jews. In some of the big urban areas, they were 1%, they were 10%. You might have picked your local schoolhouse, and the schoolhouse is run by a Protestant minister and teaches Protestantism, and half the kids in the room are Jewish. There's obviously going to be a problem here. There's going to be a collision. Now, Catholics pursue a different strategy. They initially appeal to kind of fairness. All these Protestant institutions, all these institutions are supported by taxpayers' dollars. Tell you what, we're 15% of the taxpayers. Give us 15% of the tax funds, and we'll open new institutions. We'll give us the tax money, we'll build hospitals, we'll build schools, we'll build orphanages. That's only fair that we have our own things, just like you Protestants do. Protestants say, hell no, that's not going to happen. So what Catholics pursue is a strategy of parallel institutions. They begin creating new institutions from the ground up. They need to build schools, Catholic schools. They need to build Catholic universities. They undertake building Catholic hospitals, Catholic orphanages, etc., etc. Let's see, there's a Veterans Association in town, whatever you want to call it. We need a Catholic version of it. So they kind of build their own set of parallel institutions. Now this happens slowly, and it's hard sledding because they face a lot of hostility, and they are still at this point really poor. But nonetheless, they begin building, and they build with, I think, success that probably even surprised them. So you begin to get the slow emergence of new elementary schools, high schools, colleges, hospitals, and down the list with the word Catholic in their name, Catholic orphanage, a Catholic school, a Catholic hospital. So you have that. That is going on. And, just one mention before I move on from pluralism, and that is this situation. Again, the theme of the chapter is there are cracks appearing here. The edifice isn't quite hold together. And you can see this as a series of cracks. These people are here. They're not becoming Protestants. They're not becoming just like the rest of us. They're building their own institutions. The problem remains, it's gotten worse. What do we do with these people? Where do they fit in? How the heck are they here? What are they doing here? If they're really not us, well, why are they living among us? Yeah. They can't possibly be Americans because Americans are Protestants. Okay? So, again, all this involves a struggle for Protestantism to hold its ground. Then you get, I'm trying to read my handwriting. You begin to get the Enlightenment's, well, I'll phrase it this way. The Enlightenment's been going on all the right. It didn't go away. You have this current in American culture that we haven't talked much about called the Enlightenment. And you don't really talk much about it because it tends to blur into the Protestant establishment because they get along so well, there's so much common ground and whatnot. But now, at least some thinkers, some intellectual movements coming out of the Enlightenment tradition begin to diverge more radically, okay, from Protestantism. The way I like to think of it is, no problem. If we're doing a bar graph, well, it's not really a bar graph, but we'll have a bar. This bar represents Protestantism. See my sophisticated diagramming, guys? My 7th grade art teacher, Mrs. Neem, said my school project was a waste of the school district's money. That was kind of mean, but she was not stupid. She was exactly right with John. Okay, even I knew that. Okay? And you have the Enlightenment here. They're walking together, parallel buddies walking down the path, holding hands, on and on. And then the Enlightenment people slowly, more and more, they begin moving off in a different direction. And you see the first signs of a conflict. We're perhaps not quite in the conflict yet, but we're right on the cusp of it. Because back in the day, these old Enlightenment figures, they all believed in God. Okay, maybe it wasn't quite the God we believe in, but kind of close enough. Now we're beginning to run in things like atheism. There is no God. Agnosticism, we don't know. And even more importantly, we run into the kind of breakdown on the moral front, understanding of right and wrong. I read you last time, right, from William Graham Sumner, who was a famous intellectual college professor, taught at Yale, a passage where he basically, I did talk about it, where he basically denied, the American founding, right, is built on the idea of a creator who gives us rights. Our rights come from our creator, we have these rights. We follow the laws of nature, and nature's God. We live by God's laws. Now these guys begin saying, not only do I not believe in God, I don't know what you're talking about, this law of nature stuff. There is no such thing as right. There is no such thing as wrong. People have different opinions on it. We can't really resolve it. So as Bentham said, natural law is nonsense. No, natural rights are nonsense. Natural law, nonsense on stilts. And as William Graham Sumner said in the quote I read you last time, what are you talking about, a right to life, a right to liberty? Human beings have no more rights than do rattlesnakes. They're simply another member of the animal kingdom. So you see now that coalition that played such a big role in kind of organizing and shaping and informing this American thing is in the beginning to show signs of disintegration. Additional point, you begin to get the secularization of education. Hopefully I can find this. There was a quote I like, secularization of education. More and religion begins to play progressively less of a role in the educational system. It still plays a good role. It doesn't disappear. That's going to come down the road a piece. But a much less dramatic role. It's much less front and center. So the religious element in education is beginning to fade. So it's what I read you last time, the McGuffey's Eclectic Readers. That was a book they used pre-Civil War, and it was very fiercely Protestant. That's what it was all about. It was Calvinistic theology and morality. In Adam sinned, we sinned all. That's how people learn the letter A. Now the McGuffey readers have been edited. They changed. They come out with a new edition every few years. The new editions have moved in a different direction. Although McGuffey's Eclectic Readers continued as the most popular text throughout the 19th century, the later editions contain little of explicit Protestantism. In order to serve a larger public, the editors had replaced any identifiably theological concerns with broad lessons in middle-class morality, values, and patriotism. Skipping the next paragraph, during the same period, a similar process happened in America's higher education, but with even more momentous implications. At the end of the Civil War, most American colleges were explicitly Protestant, even state universities. The vast majority had clergymen as presidents, required students to attend chapel, possess strict moral codes, taught Protestant theology and Christian ethics. In 1865, the book most highly regarded by a majority of American academics was the Bible. By 1917, the situation changed. Although many of the most respected schools still had some church control, the sectarian, meaning the specifically religious features of the program, had disappeared and become optional. Okay? And their focus has sort of shifted from less religious than, if you will, to moral considerations. They still make an effort to teach morality, but they're no longer making much of an effort to teach religion. Yes?
What page was that?
118. Another thing you get here, another thing you begin to see here, is the rise of what the book calls at the outset modernist Christianity. What the book calls modernist Christianity, but it tends later on to change the terminology and call it liberal Protestantism. Call it liberal Protestantism. Liberal here is not a political term. It's not designating their political orientation. Well, what is modernist Christianity? Okay, what is liberal Protestantism? Okay, so, I'm kind of Mr. Protestant here, living embodiment, say, of Protestantism. And I look out at my country, this America, and I notice something. Things aren't the same as they used to be. Things have changed an awful lot. You have these Enlightenment thinkers broken with Christianity, and they're among the most famous and most influential people in the whole country. You have all these accomplishments of you have all our knowledge of modern science. How do you reconcile dinosaurs with, the book of Genesis and Adam and Eve? Well, some Protestants begin to thinking, well, I may not want to go all the way with these crazy Enlightenment guys, but they do have some good points, and maybe I need to update the way I think and what my church believes in light of this new reality, in light of this growth in human knowledge and human understanding. So they begin to sort of, it varies from individual to individual and church to church. but they begin to downplay certain traditional Christian beliefs. Things like the Trinity, original sin of the Incarnation. They start getting downplayed in some churches by some. Not all, not most, but some. And also things like the Bible's full of miracles. Do we really believe all these miracles happen? Did the earth really get flooded? See Noah's Ark? Is it really possible for somebody to go around and heal blind people? I mean, the Bible's full of miracle after miracle after miracle. Can these be credible now? So they began crafting new and improved versions of Protestantism to accommodate what they see as legitimate knowledge and legitimate concerns emerging from modern science and also from the Enlightenment. So you get this new religious development, this division in the Protestant world. Because a lot of Protestants say, hell no, why should we adjust? We believe what we believe. We believe what we always had. These other people have stopped believing it. That's not my problem, that's their problem. I will remain faithful. So you get the development of modernism or liberal Protestantism as a force in American life. And if you look at the period from 1860 up till, say, 1917, that's, I think, the period covered by that chapter, and you were doing like a graph, liberal Protestantism would be going up and up and up and up. It's not the majority, even in 1917. But this way of thinking becomes very influential and very popular. And people tend to assume it's the wave of the future. Well, they never believed it. Now lots of people believe it. Someday everyone's going to believe it. You with me? Now we get to the period of 1917 to World War II. And we might call, I forget what he calls the chapter, but my notes here say, this tells the story of the end of Protestant America. The end of Protestant America. Now that doesn't, let me pause having said that to immediately qualify that. In 1917, are Americans overwhelmingly Protestant? Yes. Does Protestantism continue to exercise a serious influence on the culture? Absolutely. No question. But it no longer dominates the scene. It has rivals. It has competitors. And it's really no longer in any kind of control. America's going off in all sorts of different ways. In all sorts of different ways that have nothing to do with Protestantism. Hold on, let me find some. First thing we have, I've seen on my notes, the ascendancy of this secular worldview. This secular worldview that was a presence on the scene earlier now becomes a gigantic presence and a major challenge to kind of Protestantism's cultural hegemony. And you begin to get significant numbers of people, still a small part of the population, but a lot more than before, and strategically located in universities, schools, publishing houses, journalism, who are products of the Enlightenment and have basically rejected the whole Protestant thing. Indeed, the whole religious thing. I'll read you a quote on page 185 here. That's what I was looking for. It's a quote from Carl Becker, who was a very prominent American intellectual, let's say the 1920s and 1930s. Many moons ago, I read his book on the Declaration of Independence, which is not a good book. And I also, the book this comes out of, what was that? Has the Enlightenment title, sometimes even teach it. See, I'm getting old, I'll have to dig out the title later. Oh, didn't have Enlightenment, but the Heavenly City of the 18th Century Philosophers. The Heavenly City of the 18th Century Philosophers, which is a book ridiculing earlier generations of Enlightenment folks. That they're childish, they're immature, they still hold on to all these childless beliefs. How could they possibly believe in the Enlightenment and at the same time, go to church on Sunday? How can they be so childish as to pray and think there's a God? So Becker says the following: edit and interpret the conclusions of modern science as tenderly as we like. It is still impossible for us to regard man as the child of God, for whom the earth was created as a temporary habitation. Rather we must regard him as little more than a chance deposit on the surface of the world, carelessly grown up between two ice ages by the same forces that rust iron and ripen corn. A sentient organism endowed by some happy or unhappy accident with intelligence, indeed, but with an intelligence that is conditioned by the very forces it seeks to understand and control. The ultimate cause of this cosmic process appears in its effects as neither benevolent nor malevolent, as neither kind nor unkind, but merely as indifferent to us. What is man that the electron should be mindful of him? So the Enlightenment, as I said before, were veering off. Now they're dramatically veering off, and it's not just a handful of them. It's more and more of them. And now for the first time, you see people avowing atheism and agnosticism and things like that. There was a time, Tocqueville said when he was here, he met not a single atheist. If he had come around 1917, he would have met a bunch. Again, a small part of the population, don't get me wrong. Most Americans are Protestants, but nonetheless a significant and growing part of the population. If we had to associate a name with this development, we had to put a name with this development, provide them with the intellectual involved in this. The intellectual name we provide is John Dewey, who was a famous American philosopher. And I'm looking for a quote on Dewey, and I see no quote on Dewey. Oh, I see what it is. Well, I won't read you the quote because it turns out to be a longer one. But Dewey is an advocate of what Marsden calls scientific naturalism. Put in Becker's, he's an atheist. He believes the material universe is all that exists. There's nothing outside of it, nothing beyond it. All that exists is simply matter in motion, with no meaning, no direction, no purpose. There is no mind out there, and certainly no mind who knows us and who we are. So Dewey emerges a famous advocate of that take on things. And he becomes extremely influential. And again, this is a sign that American culture is changing. On page 184, on the bottom, there's a quote from Joseph Wood Crutch. Actually read that book as an undergraduate. I wonder if I own it somewhere. So Crutch's, you pick up on the bottom of the page. True to the last paragraph, few lines in. True to his generation, he, Crutch, saw the findings of natural science, particularly evolutionary science, as the great challenge to relate to traditional belief. Crutch, however, went beyond the commonplace claim that science undermined Christian faith to point out that it undermined humanism as well. If humans were truly no more than higher order animals, as modern science proclaimed, then humanistic ideals such as love, beauty, and moral standards were all illusions, simply pleasing survival mechanisms. So as you see more and more, America moving towards a moral crisis. Still in its early phases, don't get me wrong, but moving in that direction. And it's not just taking out traditional Christianity, it's eroding beliefs in kind of everyday morality of thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not rob. And so, you're left sort of with a vacuum then, what guides my life? So you have that development, that is a huge development. You also have during this period the continued rise of liberal Protestantism. The continued rise of liberal Protestantism. That is quickly becoming more influential, and if not the dominant form of Protestantism in America in that era, it's very close to being the dominant form. And these versions of liberal Protestantism over the generations, they detach themselves more and more from Christianity. It starts off, I don't believe in the Trinity. Then it becomes, I also don't believe in original sin. Well, I also don't believe in the incarnation. And I also don't believe in the divinity of Christ. At a certain point, there's less and less Christian substance left in arguably the dominant form of American Protestantism in this period. You with me? Then you have something else closely related to the rise of liberal Protestantism. Now, don't go dozing off, guys. At least hold off to sleep in the last 45 minutes. I thought that was kind of an amusing sideline, trying to relax. Give you a minute to conclude. Have you impressed, Sophia?
Yes, very good.
Thank you. Okay. Just humor me. That's what my kids do. Not yet. In any case, I said that liberal Protestants, that might be the dominant form of Protestantism in this day. And by saying it might be, it means also true that it might not be. There is an alternative form of Protestantism that reacts against this and reacts pretty violently. I don't mean physical violence, I mean that people are really ticked off. They see liberal Protestantism as an abomination, as a rejection of Christianity. And they say we need to be clear here. We need to assert the central Christian beliefs, the beliefs that define Christianity as a religion. We need to focus on Christianity's most fundamental, basic, and foundational beliefs and not give an inch on those beliefs, not compromise them, not reject. We need to defend them. They're focused on Christianity's fundamental beliefs. Guess how they become known? Fundamentalists. They're the guys who insist on holding on to the fundamentals. Now I gotta find my passage. Okay, it talks about, you don't even need to go over top page 68, it's talking about this. A 12 booklet series comes out called The Fundamentals. Again, trying to it becomes very influential, trying to identify the things we Christians believe, so there could be no mistake about this. And then over on 171, by 1920, the word fundamentalist was being used to describe this coalition of militantly conservative Protestants who were trying to preserve the 19th century revivalist Protestant establishment. The term was coined by a conservative Baptist editor, Curtis Lee Laws, to designate his party in the Northern Baptist Convention, the major Baptist denomination in the North. Defending fundamentals implied being willing to fight for certain doctrines that liberals had denied. Lists of the doctrines varied, but they usually included belief in the inerrancy of the Bible, the virgin birth of Christ, the authenticity of his miracles, atonement for sin through the death of Christ, Christ's resurrection, and his coming to earth. Again, it continues on, on the next page with more detail here, offering you some names and whatnot. So you have as liberal Protestantism makes more and more, let's say, accommodations to the Enlightenment. You get this reaction to it of fundamentals. You're betraying the fundamentals. You have to hold on to certain fundamental beliefs. And these fundamentalists are very numerous. Okay? And some of them are very, very respected. They teach in seminaries and things of that nature. Authors whose books on Protestantism are widely read and whatnot. And so you have these two wings, and what happens, of course, is eventually they descend into open warfare. You can't contain them within the same church because their beliefs are so different from one another. They so kind of centrally contradict each other. So a civil war emerges between fundamentalists and modernists, if you prefer liberals. Again, depending on the paragraph, he uses both terms. I wish he'd settle in one. That would be easier, but it's his book, not mine. In any case, so this is a huge event. What is the dominant religious tradition in America? Which religious tradition up till now has had unchallengeable control of America's civic consciousness, its religious consciousness? Protestantism. What now occurs in the world of Protestantism? Civil war. Not a fight to the literal death, but a real fight, because the question becomes, remember all these different Protestant churches. They just mentioned the Northern Baptist. What does the Northern Baptist Church believe? All these churches have creed, statements of belief. There's going to be a fight over that. And the people who lose the fight, if the modernists win, the fundamentalist is going to say, I can't in good conscience be part of this and leave. And the modernists would be more than happy, by the way, to help them get out the door, give them a little assistance there in packing and leaving on. You have a Protestant college. Is it going to be modernist or fundamentalist? You have a Protestant hospital. You have a Protestant publishing house. You have a Protestant magazine. The Civil War fought all these different fronts for control of these institutions, which are among the most dominant, influential institutions in America. So a civil war emerges. And that has huge consequences. Remember, they are under challenge from all sorts of things. You have the Industrial Revolution shaking things up. You have Catholics and Jews. You have, you have the secularization of education. You have the secular worldviews, guys like John Dewey and Carl Becker, who are William Graham Sumner, who are attacking them. But rather than addressing any of those challenges, their energies turn inward to fight with one another. So their focus turns internal at the very moment when their cultural dominance is under threat. And that is very bad because we know how that's going to play out. Well, they're killing each other, not literally, of course. The commanding heights of the culture are being seized by others. So the winner is the modernists, the liberal Protestants, and the fundamentalists. Well, they're without a home. They don't have colleges because the colleges are modernists. They don't have denominations. The denominations are modernists. They don't have magazines. The magazines are modernist. You go right. They don't have hospitals. The hospitals are modernist. You go through all the institutions, and they're controlled by the modernists. So the evangelicals, or I should say, fundamentalists. We'll deal with what evangelical is later. The fundamentalists are on the outs. And it's generally the way this period is referred to as they go into the wilderness. You know, the kind of biblical thing, you're out in the wilderness to fast and pray. They don't have institutions anymore. But there are millions and millions of them, they don't go away. So the people living after this happened, they tend to forget these people are there. And you can easily see why. You're not going to read a book published by them. They can't get their books published. You're not going to read a magazine they produce. No magazines will publish them. Well, let me try to go to a church that embodies fundamentalism. All the churches in town are what Marsden would call liberal Protestantism. So the fundamentalists sort of disappear here. They disappear from view, but they don't disappear completely. They are still here. And you know what they begin doing? They begin the slow, time-consuming, arduous task of building new institutions. They begin engaging in the same enterprise the Catholics were. They begin building schools and churches and seminaries to train their ministers and publish books and publish articles and stuff like that. But they're starting from ground zero, so they're going to spend the next several decades trying to build up. Right now, it would be real easy to overlook them. If you're standing there in 1940s, you might be tempted, these people are ancient history. They've gone away, they've disappeared. All I see are these modernists. Ain't so. They're there. Maybe not being seen, but they are very busy. And what they're doing are laying bricks. Both literal and figurative bricks for a future. I thought that was well done, literal and
It was.
figurative. Something else happens during this period. You might call it this, for lack of a better term, the secularization of social reform. The secularization of social reform. What do I mean by that? Well, America has a long history of social reform. I mean, I'm going to take it back further, but I'll just take it back to the Second Great Awakening. The Second Great Awakening was a big impetus for social reform. And many of these social reform movements were organized in the churches. They were almost always led by ministers. So you might say the revivalists, those guys coming out of the Second Great Awakening, They're on the cusp of social reform, and they're leading the fight for social reform in America. Now things are beginning to change. Now there's still a lot of ferment out there. Industrialization, urbanization really shakes things up, right? Really shakes things up, and creates a lot of social problems that have to be addressed. And you get now new reform movements begin to emerge to meet these new challenges. And these movements are still sometimes organized through churches. And sometimes they're led by ministers or religious figures. But the emphasis there is sometimes. Sometimes, not all the time. You begin to get the emergence of social reform movements occurring outside of the churches, and not that they're hostile necessarily to churches, but they have nothing to do with them. They function independently of them. And that is another noteworthy development, in terms of the, disintegration of the Protestant empire, Protestant cultural hegemony. Their hold on America has slipped now. The old Protestant America, in which Protestant dominated everything completely and no one else got a seat at the table, is now over. 5 after, let's pause until 20 after, and we will come back. It's fun, we're having fun.
Yes, come on, we're paying to be here.
Yes?
So I think this is
But more.
the
Okay.
Oh, the rest of my comments, we're going to, now it's no longer, doesn't matter. You mentioned that,
Now we're using the break.
You guys can get up and leave, you're not required to attend this.
you mentioned that, like, all of the new mass production, urbanization, industrialization, that people work less. It's actually not true.
The ones that go on a race.
That before the Industrial Revolution,
They work longer hours on the farms. No, if I said that was a slip of the tongue.
they worked less total time before the Industrial Revolution.
Okay, that's what you're saying, that could well be.
Yes, because when technology was introduced to the economy, industrialization, it
Before the 8-hour day.
it increased productivity, and that means that humans have to keep up with that productivity. And yes, during the Industrial Revolution, they did come up with things like the 8-hour day, but that was in response to the Industrial
To the original explosion of work.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Let me ask,
And the other comment I was going to make is you talked about the less personalized economics.
Right.
And I was going to say that's very similar to like Marxist conceptions of like alienation of labor, not feeling connected.
Right, absolutely. Marx didn't come up with this out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Okay, I just make the point. I mean, A, that's true, but B, this wasn't a uniquely Marxian insight.
Yeah.
Other people came up with what was going on around us, and people trying to figure out what it means.
People that read Marx often think he's the first.
Right, the guy who came up with this, where, he may have come up with some stuff, but not all of it, so he's heavily indebted to previous writers. As are we all. One of my mottos is we're all dwarfs sitting on the shoulders of giants, so. And stuff. We see farther than some of the great thinkers we read, in part because of that. They allow us to.
I guess with the stuff about like working less and more, you also have to take into account that there was like slavery and things like that as well. So I guess if you were enslaved, that might not be true.
Right.
But I don't know.
We were talking about the period, though, post-Civil War.
Yeah.
So, or at least mostly post-Civil War.
Well, I know for sure that in like primitive hunter-gatherer societies, they only worked like 2 hours a day. Well, what we would conceive of as
Oh, it's work.
Yeah.
Right.
Lazy bum.
A lot of times, once they
They would
just
consider the standard of living. That's the problem.
they met their their
Minimum pay, food for the day, and
primal
then
needs, and then after that, it was like okay,
yeah, hop on a movie. So, let's draw on the wall of this cave.
Something like that.
Very good. I will return.
It was this philosophy podcast I was listening to talked a lot about. Like the first episode was like how we all came from Africa, and it wasn't, and like why we think of all of our pre-Socratic leaders as Italian or Greek is because once they kind of got to that climate, you're able to be more relaxed and have like less issues of like survival.
Things aren't eating you.
Right, you're not on fight or flight as much, so you have like more time when you're sitting around a fire to feel like talk about philosophy and talk about like why things are the way they are instead of like, oh, uncle just got eaten by another.
Yeah, it's called environmental determinism.
Environmental determinism? Interesting. Well, because environment and like climate has so much to do why we move in certain places.
I don't think so.
Why we're able
Like
to
the housing
develop in certain
scholarship, yeah, it
places.
is, right? Because like, it's the housing scholarship.
Environmental
But like, if you
Yeah,
have like.
it's controversial though, because
Exactly,
it's
you're
been
supposed to put,
co-opted by
like, that.
some racist thinkers, justifying racism. People,
True.
people that come from more brutal parts of the world are become more brutal types of people.
It just says like all applications must be submitted.
Yeah, I always knew like, and they'll connect it to like even the anthropology of a monkey's skull to Africa or whatnot. And that's not inherently true because Neil deGrasse Tyson talked about in this like cool video, it's if it was flipped the other way, what would Africans say about white people? That most Africans come from nomadic people or nomads, whatever the term is. Like we split off biologically. We were originally what? You know what I'm talking about? Oh, Homo sapiens. And all Africans come from Homo sapiens, but most people, every African would have a Homo sapiens gene, but white people would also have a Homo sapien or
There were other humanoid species.
right.
back in the day.
And that if the literature was written differently, then you would tie them back to, okay, white people are less developed because they don't come from Homo sapiens, they come from whatever.
I should have just done anything else.
Homo erectus and all those other things.
Exactly.
That's like the old school form of racism, where everything's like speciesist.
Exactly.
Like the new definition where everyone like uses like power and like, oh, like white people can't be racist, or no, black people can't be racist to white people. That's like a new definition from critical theory, which is like a highly narrow philosophical definition. But it's interesting that form of racism, like the speciesist, is like coming back into vogue, like phrenology and shit on like social media.
Well,
It's
it
like,
also ties into eugenics.
yeah, I mean, like, but this was like, even racists weren't even like, for like decades, weren't even like going in that direction. They were just like, it's a moral issue and that kind of thing. But now you see this like weird pseudo-scientific gaze coming back, and I wonder, like, what caused that? I don't know. Like, it's kind of like insane because,
I think,
like, even racist people, like in the 90s and shit,
well,
it was
I think there's a difference
different.
between completely ignorant and like scholarly racism. Like people who are just completely ignorant to say that otherism, like anything that's not
Yeah.
me, is wrong.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's pretty common. That's like a common like prejudice, anyways. Like everyone is like in the eye of like of someone else's gaze is like objectified into something else. But like this is like a weird like this is like the equivalent of like somebody that you know that took acid and they have like delusions of enlightenment and they're like I know everything.
Right.
And they're like, you know, this is
What
like,
does
it's
it
weird.
kind of tie into like Aryan, like thought, like Aryans are the best race because
It's like, yeah, and I see a lot of that like pseudo like
I think that's maybe the connection
anthropological.
is like the connection to that. I mean, the Nazi ideologies are coming back too.
Yeah, it's like how the fuck did that?
I agree, like right now.
No, I was gonna say that.
I vote that we like put the blinds down, turn the lights off, and then all put our head down like we ended.
I was struggling to stay awake.
I was
It's in the air, y'all. I feel great.
All night, I put it on there last night.
Yeah, me too. I'm just sitting here like,
I'm sitting here
There was I was trying to type and my fingers were slowing down, and I was like,
No, my notes are so bad.
I was falling asleep until the pain started. Why do I?
Well, there you go.
The pain?
Sounds so
I was just thinking.
Her hand, it's nothing new.
I mean, it's not anything that's fair. Doesn't make any of this worse, but it's not.
I was wearing I maybe told you this once, I was wearing a map shirt, like a shirt, it's just like a map of the globe. And I was substituting these kids, and other group of girls come up to me, and then one of them goes, I'm from there. And I didn't know what she was exactly saying. She was pointing at Brazil. I was like, Brazil? And they all started laughing, and then she's like, no, I meant Africa.
That's
And-
similar looking.
yeah. And then I was like, well, it's over here. And I said, we're all from Africa. And then these group of girls all went. And I was like, oh, wait. One of them goes, I thought we all come from Adam and Eve. And,
Oh no.
and I said, yes, you can believe that.
You can believe
I was like, you can believe that, but this is where Adam and Eve started. I was like, they came from right here in Western Africa. And they're like, oh. I'm like, it's where God put Adam and Eve, I guess. And then we all moved from there. Into
They're gonna go tell their parents, and they're gonna get
places.
beat with like a belt.
It's like forgetting that the history that we learn in school is extremely whitewashed. We get to college and they're like, so unlearn everything.
Yeah. and-
Actually, the Civil War was not about states' rights. That's incorrect.
Like I was taught that the Civil War was about states' rights.
Yeah.
I think I had the cursor, but I was taught that the Civil War was about slavery.
Well, it's about states' rights to own slaves.
Yeah. My best friend and I
Yeah.
love to say, go ahead, finish the sentence.
But the big slide said slavery.
States' rights to own slaves,
And then
and
it
also
said
they were really upset about the
states' rights.
taxes
Nullification crisis.
on the taxes on the cotton that was being produced by the slaves as well.
So,
Boo-hoo.
me if I was in the room.
That's the other thing.
Yeah.
We're really doing plenty of stuff right now.
That's why they had the whole like thing with
Notes
what's his name, Calhoun, John C. Calhoun.
Yeah.
Yep, in South Carolina.
With the triumvirate with the fucking, what are the other two guys?
Yep.
Henry Clay, John C.
Yes,
Calhoun,
yes.
and
the other guy.
I
They
can't
had the
remember.
whole tariff stuff.
But like it was like.
That's kind of what that was the precursor to the Civil War.
I don't know.
Yeah, and you had the nullification crisis that had it wasn't really to do with like slavery, and that's where some revisionist historians try to go, see, look at that. That's why the Civil War is about states' rights. But then but what kicked off the Civil War was like slavery. like,
Also, if it was just about states' rights, we would have gone to Civil War during the nullification crisis.
yeah. Well, we almost did.
I know, but.
But, yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's what they said, but like.
Yeah.
There was, like,
okay,
the-
what was that TikTok?
the whole, like,
this
flood
guy,
Kansas thing, too.
Yeah, right. Kansas versus Nebraska or something.
And that was over slavery.
Yeah.
That was John Brown.
And the Confederate Constitution,
I feel like at
it
this point
specifically
everything is
stated
just
they
like
wanted to preserve the right to own slaves.
But then people go through these like anecdotal like Civil War like histories where they're like, if they ask the random guy fighting like the 16 or 18-year-old, why are you fighting? And they're like,
It's true, a lot of the soldiers didn't know really what they were fighting.
and there was a very illiterate working class poor population that were manipulated by the slave owning class.
Like, damn.
But that's always been the case. Even today, we have people who are like, I mean, like there's like 20% of America who's like, let's go fucking bomb Iran, and they're like blue collar poor or they're Zionists.
That's
So
what LBJ said. If you keep them both poor and uneducated, then I
I
don't
didn't
care.
realize that Iran is not like Afghanistan where there's just some tribal warlords.
every analyst
At least
since
they did have a
dude,
government.
every analyst since the Millennium War Games, which proved that we would fail a conventional a battle against Iran, every CIA everywhere has said it would be catastrophic for the United States. And so it's just kind of, yeah, we're just kind of there, man.
They've got some pretty capable missiles.
Yeah, and the IRGC is like
Yeah.
the
Did you see
SEPA.
that? They're hitting Israel with the supersonic missiles that the Iron Dome can't stop.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they did that today.
Yeah, they're running out of counter battery munitions. So
See, they gave Kuwait missiles to fight
Oh, they shot
Iran,
down
and they
some
started
warplanes
shooting down
on accident.
our
Yeah.
planes.
Yeah, live though.
I think we're underreporting U.S. casualties for
I also
sure.
think if I was a
Because
pilot,
there's
I
only,
would
what,
want.
6 or 5?
6 or 5, but when they evacuated, like for instance in Iraq, in Erbil, when they evacuated personnel, they didn't evacuate everyone. There's still like roughly 600, but they kept like contractors, like KBR workers and stuff, who are typically from like the Middle East, or they might be American citizens, or they might be
Right, like
Filipino,
Allied.
right? And they just work like at like the cafeterias and like fixing up the little like golf driving ranges and shit, like basketball courts and stuff. Those people are probably like all dead because they don't have priority. They don't have priority of like evacuation. So,
Okay.
and that like all the Shia militias have been activated, like the remnants of like even Sunni militias on behalf of Iran, which is bizarre. Like Muqtada al-Sadr's Mahdi Army, like the new iteration of that. Yeah, they're all like activated in Iraq.
So in Iran originally, like let's say 4 months ago, they had dictator.
Yeah.
What's his name?
Ayatollah Khomeini.
Nobody uses
Right.
them.
Yeah.
And they're running a
I've
dictatorship.
never noticed these things.
Wasn't perfect, but was still running.
Mhm.
We've killed not only that guy, but maybe 12 people under him.
Yeah, but they have a mosaic defense strategy where they have a complete decentralized rhizomatic command center. So it's like
It's like other countries.
like you can't like once you like if you take out like the top leadership, there's enough independent like factions
Okay.
that will just wage endless war. Like
On each other?
all on the United States, maybe on each other for power, but like think about like Iraq and how like after we failed in that invasion, how it just like splintered into just chaos.
Or they just
That
split
times
into
like
ISIS?
yeah, that times like 1,000.
We didn't fail the Iraq invasion.
Well, it was a Pyrrhic victory, yeah.
We succeeded.
Yeah, but
Afghanistan was the defeat.
yeah,
We took over Iraq in like 3 months.
yeah, but we
But then Iraq.
I would argue Iraq was a huge failure in terms of like, yeah, we created a new government.
Consequences of after we took over the country.
Yeah, and then the insurgency, but then the new government got dominated by the members of that insurgency,
Yeah.
like Muqtada al-Sadr,
But
who
unlike
became a politician.
Afghanistan, we had no problem controlling the country.
Are you chilly?
Afghanistan
Oh,
is
They were surrendering so fast that we had a hard time running prison space for the Iraqi prisoners.
yeah, we fucked up though.
I'm not going to my next class.
Iran is like doomsday scenario, like not good because you have to now commit ground troops because we're gonna
Too tired.
for sure have more lone wolf attacks and probably attacks on infrastructure within the United States. For sure.
I think there are enough Iranian agents in the United States for that.
For sure,
Look
for sure.
Tell my professor more here.
For sure.
I don't think so.
Now, maybe a lot of them might have defected
But
because
I
they
will
have all
also
the reason to
say,
Maybe
defect.
This
just
is the time to
general
do it.
Islamic terrorism, but maybe I don't think Iranian agents.
RGC, yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah, what they'll do is like a CIA agent will like create a whole network of people that aren't directly like them to collect information. What they'll do is kind of like special operations, like the SEPA or the IRGC will come in, and you'll have like 1 or 2 guys, and they'll like create a network, and they'll even like make up shit, like hey, like I'm a Sunni instead of a Shiite, and like we need to do this, and like they can activate like lone wolf attacks, like for sure. This is like a known.
Maybe that's what happened in Austin.
That's what the FBI is assuming.
I think what happens in Austin is
My
super
fascination has
suspicious.
been that I really
The Waymo thing was like pretty fucked. That's pretty interesting.
What, the Austin thing?
Yeah, how like the Waymo car like blocked
Oh, yeah.
traffic. I'm like,
Like he's squishing.
I'm not saying like there are
Ambulances were
IRGC,
getting there and stuff.
there are IRGC like hackers, like they've done like all these kind of like things
Yeah.
before that have that capability, but I mean like I don't think.
I don't think that was as planned.
I don't know why the
Because it's so messy.
You know-
The cop just rammed the
Anito?
Waymo.
You haven't heard of Anito?
Yeah, why not?
Where would I have heard of Anito? Quick.
But
Oh.
the weirdness
Exactly.
is that a lot of people aren't talking
Do you
about how
TikTok?
this is very similar to the last time we attacked Iran when the car smothered
Anito.
through
I'm
6th
also
Street.
never on it anymore.
Remember that? That was like 5 months ago when the car went through 6th Street, and then he ended up dying in the car, also
Now,
wearing property of Allah.
There are unconfirmed reports that Mossad has been caught trying to sabotage like ExxonMobil stations, like in Kuwait, in Qatar, and Saudi Arabia, like blowing up.
False flags landed.
False flags blaming Iran
Yeah.
on hitting the oil industry to drive gas prices up. Apparently, supposedly,
But I also
some conservatives, some liberal media are coming out, like independent journalists are saying that like they have been Mossad agents have been arrested trying to do false flag operations on Gulf states. If that's the case, then like, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if like you have something like that in the United States either, to be honest.
Well, this just more seemed like a CIA operation for public.
I'm trying to.
Yeah, to get public support,
To
rally
get public support
yeah.
against this. And it happens the day after, both times it happens the day after the
It's
attack.
crazy how if when the CIA does stuff like this, they're able to convince people to do something with their
Maybe they put their
shirt.
strength to stay up and see.
They prey on vulnerable, insane people, and they don't say, "Hey, I'm CIA." It's kind of like the IRGC thing that I said. It's not. They don't say like, "Hey, I'm CIA. You should do this." They'll like honeypot
It's like
pretend
if
to
you go to a
be.
mass shooting, you're probably gonna die afterwards. Cops are gonna kill you.
Well, think of like the kid who was on top of the roof.
Oh, yeah.
Where they find him?
Kids on top of that UT, what are you talking
The
about?
the one that shot Trump. Yeah. Was also in a BlackRock video.
Kirk Manch?
Yeah. What's his name?
Not to be conspiratorial, but I think back to like the case of like Sirhan, and I'm like, that is like an MK Ultra. Like,
Well, we
that-
understand like Lee Harvey Oswald specifically, like how far back that went and how they were following him since he was
Yeah,
in
he had an
college.
FBI man.
dude, he was trained as like there's
already,
evidence
like,
that he was like
ex-military.
there was a training ground for the Bay of Pigs invasion, not only in Arkansas, but there was one out on the other side of Lake Pontchartrain from New Orleans, and like he's like documented being at the CIA like paramilitary training ground, and he's also been to Russia back and forth, and they tried to say, oh, he's a Russian asset. None of that makes sense. I would love to see those files be declassified.
And everything that was happening before JFK was happening in New Orleans, where Lee Harvey Oswald was, and where he's created like this organization.
Howard
this
Hunt even
anti-communist
said-
organization.
Howard Hunt, the guy that was involved with like Watergate, the CIA guy, even like famously like said something like sketchy about like Lee Harvey Oswald, where he's like he might have been like an asset or an agent. Like
His FBI handler killed
It's kinda
himself
weird.
before he could testify in front of the Warren Commission. Did you know
Is that tea?
It is tea and lemonade.
wait, what?
Arnold Palmer.
that? He had an FBI handler, and I forget his name, but he killed himself before he could testify to the Warren
Mixes
Commission on
in
the
other
JFK
yummy
assassination.
stuff.
I think we're never gonna know. We're never gonna get those files out.
I don't
Just
know,
like
they're pretty certain on like what we know so far. Like they did that movie JFK with Kevin Costner.
I've never seen it.
When they created this podcast, Who Killed JFK, trying to understand all the discrepancies and understanding where all these people, FBI people and CIA people, were at the time.
And Kennedy wanted to defund the CIA, right, or abolish it eventually. So there's incentive or motive.
Yeah, when LBJ was inaugurated on the Air Force One, Jackie Kennedy refused to take off of her outfit that had her husband's blood all over it because she said she quite wanted them to see what they did to her husband. Which I'm like,
That's badass.
it's pretty crazy. It's a pretty crazy thing to say.
I'm sure a good portion of it was still shock of her husband's brains all over the place, but
And her.
yeah,
That picture's insane.
Did the governor die too?
no.
No, he lived through the rest.
It went through like his
The
other.
driver,
to become
the driver
Secretary
died,
of
right?
Treasury.
Someone else died as well, I think. Was it the driver?
I don't think anyone
I
else
don't think anyone
died. I
else
think
died
the
yet.
other
That's not
injuries. The governor had like through his.
I think there were 3 people
Like
that
it
were
went
shot.
through Kennedy and then the other people?
Yeah, so one of them went through Kennedy and then went through the governor and then implemented.
I think this
his
podcast that
license.
Carl,
That's like the
Carl
magic
Reiner,
bullet
what-
theory, is that how it travels.
It's a Hollywood person, but it talks about how like the only people who ever saw Lee Harvey Oswald in the building, they saw like there were like 3 people, a janitor and like a assistant lady. She said, I saw him in the downstairs floor eating lunch, and then the shots happened and he was
I mean, they're not
gone.
like that close in age.
And then there's only one staircase that he could have gone out. And even him, before he died, says, I didn't do this. I was kind of set up. And then he died, and then the mobster, like the mob,
Jack Ruby.
Jack Ruby, also
This is the one who shot him, killed him.
completely
outside
connected to it, and then
Dallas.
dies right after.
He killed a cop.
Before
Lee Harvey
being
Oswald
testified.
So you don't
Killed a police
believe
officer who pulled him over after the shooting.
Yeah.
Yeah. He
There's a
killed a police
conspiracy
officer
theory that a
JD
time
too.
traveler killed him?
The man on like the green hill or something.
Okay, let's get back. I was trying to find a quote I wanted to read you. That I thought was a
Who
good
states
summary.
killed JFK? Tell us, Mr. political science.
Very close to
A human being.
No, there's no accordion. There's no.
I'm giving you my answer, a human being.
What was the
I
question?
doubt if it was a space alien, but can't rule that out. But anywho, we ready to get back into session here? Pushing on, we made our way, let's see, through 1917, we moved up to the era of World War II, right? Up until that, well, yeah, we took it up to World War II, just to see if there's anything in here I skipped. I say this is what to do. Okay, well, let's move it, yeah, we've taken it up to the start of World War II, basically, and now we're doing here World War II till 1963, the story of American religion, American culture in there. First thing we need to know, and this is crucial, is somewhere during this period, America stopped thinking about itself as a Protestant nation and begins talking about itself as a Judeo-Christian nation, or as a biblical nation, or as a nation founded on biblical principles. There was a famous book published during this time. It's considered one of the 2 or 3 greatest books ever written on the sociology of American religion. I would teach it in this class if we had time to add 4 or 5 more books, which I'd be willing to do if you really want. But the title of the book is Will Herberg, Protestant Catholic Jew. That's a Protestant Catholic Jew. And I mentioned the Herberg book because it's kind of the acknowledgement of this fact. He's a sociologist studying American religion, and it occurs to him we no longer really, most of us obviously, we don't think of ourselves as a Protestant nation anymore, because there are lots of Catholics here, and people by and large acknowledge Catholics can be good citizens, good Americans. Likewise, plenty of Jews, we think they can be good Americans too, so America doesn't mean being a good American doesn't involve being a Protestant. You can be a good American in 3 ways: Protestant, Catholic, Jew. They're all good and legitimate ways of being American. That indicates that Judaism and Catholicism are much more widely accepted now as kind of legitimate players in American public life than they were previously. You still have some people with problems with them. When speaking of John Kennedy, when John Kennedy ran for president in 1960, he was the first Catholic elected president, right? His religion was a big deal. That was a big kind of point to people. Could we trust a Catholic to be president? Was that something okay? Was that something legitimate? Or did that in some sense represent the betrayal of America and the betrayal of what we Americans believe we're committed to? So this is the rise of Judeo-Christian America in the place of Protestant America. And it's an era with more good feelings, say harmony, happiness between Protestants, Catholics, and Jews than any previous era of American history. There's a lot of like interfaith events and things like that. Next thing you have going on here is, well, I guess let's talk about the I'm doing it in a different order than I jotted it down, but the secularization of American life. And if I want to do that next, I'm trying to think the way these would flow most easily. Now let's talk about the secularization of American life. American life acquires an increasingly secular tone. It's not that religion goes away. Religion remains a player. on the cultural scene, but it plays a greatly diminished role, a much less influential role than it once played. And this, so, that's what we have to deal with. And he offers us a couple examples. He says a couple of things on this point to illustrate this. One point concerns John F. Kennedy, in that Kennedy's Catholicism was indeed, I'm trying to find the page, was indeed a political, I didn't jot down the page, for a big exclamation would say, talk about it, without giving them, that was a sticking point, certainly. But there's another dimension to it. You think of the overall tone of the Kennedy administration. It was extremely secular in nature. And Kennedy ran sort of as a pragmatic technician. I could make America work, and we could send a man to the moon, and all those. And it was a very secular, vibe to it. Religion did not play that big a public role in Kennedy compared to his immediate predecessors. For example, Eisenhower was constant. It was who instituted national prayer breakfasts and stuff. He jabbered on constantly about religion. Kennedy, not so much. That's one of the signs. Some of the other things he talks about in the book, examples of this. One concerns the Second World War. Now, in the Second World War, as you'll recall, the Germans began bombing European cities, including their civilian populations. They didn't bomb American cities, of course, they were too far away. But they began bombing not just their adversaries' military bases, but their civilian populations as well, consciously trying to take out as many civilians and cause as much, desolation as they possibly can. And the Allies responded by doing what? Bombing their civilians. The most vivid example of that is, of course, the atom bombs in Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But there's arguments made that more people were actually killed on bombing raids in Germany that pretty much reduced whole cities to a giant pile of rubble with no standing buildings, hundreds and hundreds of planes, each one unloading 10,000 pounds of bombs. For 4 or 5 hours, that will do it. So, that's kind of facts of World War II, but it suggests certain moral questions. Okay, in the Christian tradition, there is something called the just war doctrine. It goes back to the writing, not that this is important for your purposes, it goes back to the writings of St. Augustine. And the argument is war is legitimate, something a Christian can wage and participate in. But there are certain rules that have to be followed. Rules determining when you're allowed to go to war, rules determining what you do during the war, rules determining how you act if you've won the war. There are rules regulating warfare. One of those rules is you attack your opponent's military. You don't attack civilians. You don't bomb residential neighborhoods. You don't try to take out hospitals. Okay, that was the traditional teaching. And that was ignored, obviously, by the Germans, but it was also ignored by the Allies, the Americans and the British in their bombing. And the interesting thing, says Marsden, is there wasn't a big debate about it. It just said, what can we do? They did it, we got to retaliate in kind. This idea seemed to completely have disappeared from people's minds. Now, you can find some articles, if you read theology journals, you can find I can even give you the names of some theologians who wrote articles saying this is an immoral thing to do, but they were few and far between, and there was no big public debate about them. And according to Marsden, this teaches us something. It teaches it just shows us another way in which the influence of Christianity has declined. In which the influence of Christianity has declined. So he discusses, and we'll read the quote on page 193. It actually starts before there, but the key paragraphs are on page 193 about this and about its significance. Okay? The other thing he calls our attention to in this vein is the reality of the Cold War, right? This conflict, you might say, between the Soviet Union and its allies and the United States and its allies, between the communists and democracy, however you want to phrase it. Okay? And one of the interesting things, there's a Protestant theologian who was very famous back in that day, Reinhold Niebuhr. There's another course I haven't taught in years where I have to read a book of Niebuhr's. God, it's probably about 10 years. I need to do that again. Let the good times roll.
Reminisce.
Right, but Niebuhr's point is that this conflict of the Cold War is frequently presented as a conflict between, if you will, godliness and godlessness. The Soviets are atheists. They reject the idea of God. They persecute religious people. We're the religious side of the war. Okay? And Niebuhr says, well, there's some truth to that. The Catholic, the communists are atheists. That is true, and certainly religious belief is a presence in America. But what strikes Niebuhr is how secular are the grounds on which the war is contested, on which the arguments are made. This is over on page 195. In the irony of American, this is last full paragraph on the page. In the irony of American history, Niebuhr pointed out the ironic similarities between the United States and the dreaded Soviet Union. The two nations were similar in their enlightened confidence in human ability to use scientific analysis to create an ideal society. Each had ultimately similar goals. Humans should be masters of their own destinies. Each country proposed similar means for reaching these goals, essentially through an economic system. Both tended to define humanity in terms of property, either the ownership of it or the lack thereof. Each revered a scientific elite. Each nation had similar mythologies asserting their own innocence and the corruption of their opponents, and so on and so forth. Now, Niebuhr was not a critic of the Cold War. He was actually often judged as a Cold Warrior, someone who advocated for the American side of the Cold War and strongly supported it. But the point he's making here is about the American character. Okay? He says, despite all the references to religion and whatnot, America has been hollowed out. We don't really approach the world, look at the world through a religious prism. We don't really look at the world through the lenses of the theology we claim to profess. Really, we may avow our religious beliefs, profess them, but our operating values that determine our behavior largely secular. So, that's not a call for saying the United Soviet Union should have won or plague on both your houses. It was a call for America to look in the mirror and reflect on who we are, really who we say we are. So you have that and countless other development. Another thing is, I'm just riffing now, things I remember, but Fulton Sheen, he's someone who's read the book, comes up several times. Fulton Sheen was a Catholic bishop. And when TV was a new medium, in the early 1950s, he got a show on it. And this show ran, I don't know, for 7 or 8 years, then it stopped, then he picked it up again a few years later. This was for years the most watched show in America, watched TV show in America. And it consisted of a guy in Bishop's full regalia with the cape and the whole bit, and a blackboard and a podium. And him saying, today, people, we need to talk about the Holy Trinity. That was, it won Emmy Awards. It was Central American entertainment. Could you imagine that being the case today? And again, that's an indication of the gulf. That in that day didn't raise eyebrows, just normal. Today we think that was totally bizarre, because in his day, religious views, religious values were much more present in the culture. Now they seem like this weird intrusion from outer space. So you have that. So America is growing progressively more secularized. And then you have the question of the religious revival. During the 1950s, America undergoes a far-reaching religious revival, or at least so it appears. I'm trying to find the passage here. I didn't jot it down again. Here we go, page 196. The United States from the 1940s until the early 1960s was in the midst of an extensive religious revival. Skipping now, religious groups of nearly all sorts were growing and prospering. A national survey conducted shortly after World War II revealed that 2 out of 3 Americans attended religious services at least once a month, and that 42% attended every week. Other polls revealed that 19 out of 20 Americans believed in God, 9 out of 10 said they engaged in prayer, 6 out of 7 viewed the Bible as the divinely inspired Word of God, and 3 out of 4 believed in life after death. And there's this intense growth. They can't keep up with the church building and building churches everywhere. They can't put them up fast enough to accommodate the crowds. All the buildings are seem to be too small for the masses who are suddenly flowing in. And there are all sorts of manifestations related. That's when they add under God to the Pledge of Allegiance. That was the next, getting ahead of myself. That's where they established the National Prayer Breakfast that the President speaks at. And so on and so forth. So you have this religious revival going on. It's really kind of big news if you think about all the cultural tide since the Civil War seemed to be flowing against religion, right? And now all of a sudden it's flowing towards religion again. This is really, so surprised, this wasn't predicted or anything. There were guys who studied this saying, we're too many day now for this big religious revival. The experts were shocked, and there was a lot of news stories about it, and a lot of reporting and whatnot. So at the same time this other stuff is going on, you have this huge religious revival. But the question is, and this is the $64,000 question, what's going on here? How real is this revival? Going back to page 196, at the bottom of that paragraph I started reading you, when you saw all those stats about believing in the Bible and stuff, over half of the adults, when asked, could not name any one of the four Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So how do you square this with, I pray every day, I go to church Sunday, I never miss? Gospels, what are they? This doesn't seem to fit in. And there are other polls about other people's, about their religious beliefs, and they seem pretty sketchy. There doesn't seem to be a lot of knowledge there, a lot of thought having gone into this. And then over on page 198, he's talking about a poll. Let's go back to Herberg. What Herberg points out, even of those Americans who said that religion was, quote, very important, unquote, to them, over half said that their religious beliefs had no real effect on their ideas or conduct in politics and business. So religion is very important to me, but it doesn't influence anything other than what I do for an hour on Sunday morning. So the question becomes, how real is this religious revival that's going on? And that's one of the questions Herbert posed, and we're going to read a little essay by his down the road a piece. But how real is this revival? What's going on? How to explain this mix? Things seem to be getting more secular. You have this religious revival. People participate, but they don't know anything about what they're participating in. It's a quandary. And the conclusion Herbert draws, and we'll hear more about it later, is that this is more a celebration of, it's less about religion, this religious revival, than it is about the celebration of America and the celebration of American values. And that if you look beneath the surface, you look at what people really believe, what he calls their operative beliefs, the beliefs they say guide their everyday life. Those beliefs tend not to be religious, despite their protestations of a religious person. So the questions about how deep this religious revival is, and not to give away the next chapter or 2 or 3, but the answer is this religious revival is going to end as abruptly as it had started. One day, people wake up 15 years later, and all of a sudden, all the arrows that have been going straight up, are now going down, and going down faster than they had gone up. Another thing happening during this time is we see a return from the wilderness here. We see a return for the wilderness. The people returning are, remember, our friends, the fundamentalists. Some of them are content to stay in the wilderness. They like it. Say, this is great. We have our own little churches, our own little world. We don't like the surrounding society. It can compatible with our beliefs and values. So the society can go about its business. We'll go about our business, and no problem here. If it doesn't bug us, we will bug it. But other fundamentalists are dissatisfied with this. They say we have an obligation, I was going to say a moral obligation, but even more than that, a religious obligation to preach the gospel. That's what we're here for. And they say we have to re-enter the public square. Okay? And those people develop the name evangelicals, because over and over again they constantly talk, we have to evangelize people. We have to evangelize people. We have to present the gospel, no matter what. And the key figure, this is discussed starting on page 198. The key figure here, the phenomenon discussed there, the key figure is Billy Graham. Billy Graham was a Southern Baptist minister, but he started doing something kind of interesting when viewed in historical context. He started going around the country and holding events that he called crusades. They didn't take place in tents. They took place in auditoriums and eventually in stadiums. Eventually there would be 40,000 people in a stadium listening to him preach. And he he seeks to convert people, he says, to Christianity. He doesn't aim to make them Southern Baptists. As a matter of fact, over time, what he starts doing is these ministers show up. They have like a Southern Baptist section. If you want to get involved in Southern Baptists, you're on a sign, you go talk to that guy, sign up, and he'll tell you where the nearest church is, right through the Protestant denominations. He wasn't interested in pushing people towards one denomination rather than another. He was interested, he says, in just converting them to Christianity. Just here 1 second, very emotional.
Actually, it's a little off topic. Never mind.
Okay. Very emotional style. Lots of tears, lots of singing, people holding arms and swaying, altar calls, people experiencing being born again, having these very emotional conversion experiences. And of course, he starts small and obscure. He's this, Southern Baptist preacher taking the first baby steps out of the wilderness. But he becomes one of America's most influential religious figures. Because by the time you get to the mid-1950s, this guy's filling football stadiums with people. He's traveling around the country. These crusades would go on like for a week. He'd preach every night. He wouldn't do it all himself. He obviously had singers there and other ministers to preach, but he was the main guy. And so he, and this was a huge phenomenon. I remember as a kid, that'd be on TV. When he was like preaching in the New York area, at least one of the channels would preempt programming so you could watch the crusade each night on TV. I mean, this was a huge thing. Remind you of anything? What does it remind you of, Isabel?
First grade and second grade.
Both great awakenings, right? Both great awakenings. So the evangelicals are back, and they're back. There are lots of them, and they want to influence America, and they want to change America, and they are intent on becoming major players in America. Now they have built the infrastructure necessary to do this. And again, this is just a shock because I think it's kind of amusing. Like, nobody knew they were there. When the liberal Protestants won, these people sort of slipped off the news screens. There was no reportage about it, no discussion. You wouldn't know they were there, but all of a sudden, we're back. And where the heck did these guys come from? It was like they popped in out of nowhere. And turns out they were there the whole time. You just weren't paying attention. The media just wasn't paying attention. Or for that matter, the scholars who study this stuff were not paying attention. Fair enough? Another thing happens during this period that I'm not going to say much about now because we're going to spend time on it, maybe even later today. We'll see, but certainly next class, that's from the Chappelle book. The Civil Rights Movement is a huge political and social revolution that occurs in America over a period of about a decade. And what makes it so interesting to us is that this movement was organized through the churches. It was led by ministers. It presented itself as a religious event. One might say a religious awakening. And so this is another, right now things are getting a little weird here. I don't mean in our room, in the American, you have all these counter currents. You have this increased secularity, but and so you look at this in 1965, the religious revival has crashed, the L's going like off a cliff down, but at the same time you got the civil rights movement and you got Billy Graham all over the place. And as he's going to say in the next chapter, what it's going to give you is a very fragmented America. There's so many different things going on at once. There's like almost no center, if you know what I mean. No thing you can say, well, this is the big thing that is driving. This is the big thing that is driving the culture. That is making things happen out there in the culture. Fair enough. So you have that. And let me find a passage here. Didn't read your book, Billy Graham. Let me. Okay, that's our triple melting pot. I didn't read with it. Here just, I think this puts a nice kind of exclamation point on this chapter. That's why I'm saying it here. It isn't that it slipped my mind when I was discussing something. Over on page 209, when Will Herberg talked about Protestants, Catholics, and Jews as representing three major faiths, he was pointing out that the faiths were all, to some degree, secularized, and that they all supported the American way of life. That's his point about the thinness of the revival that we'll deal with in more detail. Many Americans, however, did not subscribe to any formal religion, but held to a thoroughly secular value system. Some commentators of the era designated such a secular value system as simply a fourth faith. John Courtney Murray, for instance, explicitly added secularist to Protestant, Catholic, and Jew to describe Americans' dominant worldviews. Protestant Martin Marty followed Murray's lead in speaking of the fourth faith as secular humanism. Secular humanism, or secular and humanistic. This religion of democracy, as Marty also called it, had an established church in the field of public education. Other commentators made a similar point. You with me? And now we move into the last chapters. I think there were two of them left. I'm going to sort of treat them quickly and sort of treat them together because I'm desperate to move on, frankly. But there is some stuff in there that is worth talking about the changing religious scene in America and the way it impacts American culture. Okay? One of these things is this. See if this shocks you. Increasing religious, fill in the blank. Starts with a P, second letter's an L, third letter's a U. Pluralism. Increasing religion. I'm going to look at these guys. You guys can't answer anything. I will forget about that.
They weren't answering either.
I don't know that. They tell me you were. I'll believe
I
you.
was shocked though.
Okay. Increasing religious pluralism. How so? Well, we now got, according to the chapter that just ended, nobody here but Protestants, Catholics, Jews, and secularists. The next chapter says, well, that actually changes. That might have been true circa 1955, kind of, sort of. But by the time you're into 1970 or something, that is no longer the case. How is it no longer the case? What has happened here? What has changed?
Arab Spring.
What?
Arab Spring.
No, not the Arab. The 2000, back in 1970. Days of what's changed is this: you begin to get world religions that traditionally had no footprint in America, essentially weren't present, or if they're present, such so few numbers they were negligible. 200 people in a country of 100 million. Some of these religions: Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam. And those are just the three of the most notable ones. There are lots of all sorts of little Eastern religions begin getting a toehold. There's an explosion in the number of these kind of small, I don't want to say small is the wrong word, of these religions that had not been present in America up till now. They may have long histories, but not in the USA. Now, their numbers are still small, okay, but their numbers are continually growing during this period. And they grow to the point where they sort of can't be ignored. You know, there are just too many of them that have to be taken into account as something that's happening, something that's happening. So you have that development, and that's further pluralization. Okay, I can say it. It's becoming even more pluralistic. Even back in the days, you could at least say, okay, Protestants, Catholics, and Jews share a bunch of stuff in common. Even the secularists on a lot of things were at least somewhat on the same page, but now, you have all these other religions in play. Again, the story is fragmentation. What is the center? Over and above this, another addition. You get the emergence of what you might call, trying to come up with a good name that'll be clear. Yes. We'll call them self-made religions, for lack of a better term. That is, and I mean some particular way. I don't mean people inventing a new religion. Some people did that. People practice it. What I mean is people creating their own individual religion just for them. Just for them. They're not saying you need to join us. No, this is my individual religion that guides my life. That guides my life. How do these people create their individualized religions? They look around and they see what's out there religiously. And just like you might mix and match outfits and clothing. You go to a store, right? I'll wear this sweater with these pants or something. Or if you may try to get your wife or daughter to buy you clothes because you hate it. But my son the other day, he said, Dad, I'm just like you. I have a whole new wardrobe for work. I said, that's great. How is that like me? He said, I made my sister do it. She loves shopping for clothes. He gave her a couple $100, said, have fun at the mall on me. And she actually came back with some clothes for him. That could have turned out disastrously. Trust me, I've given her that card before. But how do these people do these self-created religions? They look around at what's out there. They say, that's a really cool thing Jews do. I really like that. And, prayer rug. Muslims use prayer rugs. I should use a prayer rug. That would really help me. And Catholics use these, what are they, rosary beads here. Well, that'd be nice too. So they begin picking around not only kind of practices, but also beliefs. I like what Hindus say about this. I like what Christians say about that. And some of them, so they pull stuff out of other religions to make their own unique religion. And they're pulling it over to something that they may create some stuff themselves. But it's this unusual phenomenon of kind of a custom-made religion. Because normally if you think about religion, very word, the root comes from Latin, means binding, bringing together. They're not trying to bring anyone together. They're not saying, come join my church. They're saying, I have my own church. And if you'll want a church, get your own. This is just for me. Made only for me. But he talks about this on page 235. I'm in the first full paragraph on the page, about 5 or 6 lines down. One poll revealed that 80% of Americans would agree that an individual should arrive at his or her own religious beliefs independent of any churches or synagogues. In Habits of the Heart, the authors reported an interview they believed epitomized much of American religion. The interviewee named Sheila said frankly that her religion was Sheilaism. Sheila described it the following way: I believe in God, I'm not a religious fanatic. I can't remember the last time I went to church. My faith has carried me a long way. It's Sheilaism. Just my own little voice. So these kind of self-made religions. Now let's just pause for a moment and mention something in past. Anyone see a Tocquevillian connection here? What? Yeah, many of them are pantheistic, but not always.
It's also incredibly individualistic.
That's what I was thinking of. And consumeristic, because the consumer, your kind of religion is not something you conform to. You sort of take, what you want. It's something you look out there among the options and like going to a mall and pick what you want out of it. So, so that's what I was thinking. So that's a big development. And something, there's always some of that, I'm sure. But as a phenomenon with millions of adherents, that's kind of new and novel. Another thing that's new and novel, let's see if I can find the page that emerges during this period. No, that's not what I wanted. And that's where I was. Is over on page 223, where he talks about therapeutic religion. Therapeutic religion. Now, that's a little complicated to explain, but I will take it upon myself to do that now. The way, this is going to be kind of crudely put, I'm not trying to make light of serious matters, but the way religion was thought about historically, the assumption was there was a true religion. Now, Kate might believe in religion X, and Amanda religion Y, and Dylan religion Z. But there was a true religion out there. There was a true faith, you could call it, a true belief system. It's kind of you guys know the X-Files? I actually didn't even watch it when it was cool. I'd already opted out of popular culture. But the truth is out there, right? The truth is out. So you had this list of options and you pick. I believe Catholicism is true. I believe Episcopalianism is it. I believe in Reform Judaism. Well, no, I believe in Orthodox Judaism. No, I'm a Baptist. I'm a Quaker. And right on down the list, you pick one. You look at them, and you pick one. Now, normally the way it works is you're born into a religion. People do convert and move, especially today, something we'll talk about. But still, the background assumption is there is one religion, and you sign up for it, right? There was an underlying assumption. This was about truth. It was getting yourself right with God. Getting yourself right with something higher than you. Aligning your life with some kind of higher, transcendent reality. Are we clear about this? Do I need to develop it anymore? I'll happily do that. A new mindset emerges sometime, I don't know, in the 1960s, 1970s, that was come to call therapeutic religion. And in this point of view, the point of religion isn't truth. It's not about finding the truth about where we came from and where we're going and what our lives are really all about. It's not about aligning ourselves with some higher power. It's not about getting right with God or something of that nature. Okay? What religion is about is happiness, peace of mind, individual fulfillment. So now from this attitude, they look out there and they don't ask what is true. They don't ask what has God, or whatever you want to call the higher being, has commanded. You ask, what feels good to me? What helps me get through the day? What gives me peace of mind? I have a lot of anxiety, tremendous anxiety. What will help me relax and overcome this anxiety? What will help me make friends and have a good social life? What will help me in the workplace to be a success at work? Now, religion in this therapeutic aspect is instrumentalized. It's a tool that you use to achieve whatever you want. And there's obviously no right answers here. Okay? And even raising the question of truth is it's a category mistake. Because what just flew?
The cap to my pin. It's all good.
No damage, no harm, no foul. It's about choosing just what makes you comfortable. What makes Kate comfortable isn't what makes Isabel comfortable. Is it what makes Max comfortable? Kind of like what you want to eat tonight. Kate wants Tex-Mex. Isabel wants barbecue. Max wants pizza. Yeah.
I'm a vegetarian.
I want a vegetarian. You're all the way a vegan.
No, just vegetarian.
Okay. My daughter-in-law is a vegan, so
Way too much work.
it's a lot of work, believe me. But she does it in good spirit. You know what? She's a great chef. My son eats better than I do. And everyone's jealous at work. He'll go to lunch with, I'm having some chicken parmesan for lunch. And wait till you see tomorrow, she made lasagna. And I'm sitting at home trying, do we have any sandwich meat in? What do you mean Nick and his friends ate the chicken that was our family dinner? Well, you were working in the backyard. But anyway, it's just like tasting food. It's subjective. You pick what works for you. So that is a very different approach. This turning into religion into a therapeutic phenomenon. The famous book, not so much on religion, but on Jeremy's turn towards a more therapeutic culture, is called The Triumph of the Therapeutics, surprising enough, by Philip Reeve. It is a really, really, really important book, but really, really hard. I hate when I have to look at it and stuff. There's all the mix of Freudian terminology and technical terms from sociology, and sometimes it seems not to be written in English at all. But there's good stuff there if you can get through that. So then you have the rise of therapeutic religion, and that's making for a fundamentally different kind of religious scene. Meanwhile, those evangelicals who came back, they are still back and still very active. And about those liberal Protestants, their numbers are greatly, greatly, greatly diminished. People who study numbers, the big guy's Ryan Burge there, if you ever want to look into this, Burge. He has a really good blog. He's a statistician, but interested in religion. He's also a minister. A lot of those church closed down for lack of members. So I guess a former minister. But he projects that many of these liberal Protestant churches, they call them mainline churches. Meaning they're kind of the normal people. That's how they like to present themselves, and the fundamentalists and the kooks were the mainline. They're closing down. They're losing numbers, they're closing buildings and stuff. And current trends continue, which have been pretty consistent since the mid-60s. Most of them will not exist effectively in America in a quarter century. So, the liberal Protestant around, but in much reduced numbers and much reduced influence. How the mighty have fallen. They once dominated the culture. The evangelicals are still around. Note that the Protestants are still fighting with each other. They're not on the same page. Catholics are still around, but guess what? They're not fighting with each other like Protestants used to. There's a split and still do, there's a split in the world of Catholicism. There's no agreed upon terminology. I forget what he calls it. I'll just call it modernist Catholics versus Orthodox Catholics. Nobody calls the Orthodox side fundamentalists or evangelicals on the Catholic side. Those are distinctly Protestant terms. So that's going on as well. And also what you have going on is, right, ever-growing secularization. There are ups and downs, but the overall trends are significantly down religiously. We have a whole book on that. At the end of the semester, we'll talk about development. But now, depending upon who you believe, somewhere between 20 and 30% of Americans, and somewhere upwards of 40% of people your age, are classified as nuns, not NUNS, but religious sisters. Nuns, people who say when asked, what is your religious affiliation, what religion you follow, they say none. Now that doesn't mean those people are atheists and agnostics, as we'll see we discuss it. Most of them are believers of one kind or another, but they're not into organized religion and whatnot. So we'll take a look at that in more detail. Do it in a whole new, that's a radical development because that number in World War II would have been 2%. And now you're talking about 25. Actually, there was only 10% in 1995. And it has moved dramatically, although it seems now to have stopped. It's been steady for a couple of years. So there is that. The nuns, the Catholic Civil War. So, here's the one other thing I wanted to mention. There has emerged in American culture. This is something we'll come back to in great detail. He only spends a page or two, and I don't think does a good job with it. But we'll approach it minimally now and maximally later. He talks about a cultural conflict centered on morality. There's a moral conflict in America. It's been going on since the 1960s. For lack of a better way of framing it, he doesn't really do a good job of framing it. There are people who are very traditional in their moral beliefs. And there are people who are not so traditional in their moral beliefs, who reject the traditional moral norms. And you see this debate popping up in all sorts of areas of American life. And again, we'll discuss it in depth later, spend a whole day on it. But it's interesting because some churches are on one side or another of this. Other churches, this moral divide splits down the middle. Taking it back to Tocqueville, and I know we're just about out of time, we're about to conclude, is one of the things Tocqueville stressed in America, this strong moral consensus. People agreed more on the principles of morality. There were a couple exceptions, but they agreed on the principles of morality. That was true in 1900. That was perhaps less true, but still mostly true in, say, 1950. That is not true anymore. Americans are no longer united by the kind of broad moral consensus Tocqueville talks about. And churches are in all sorts of ways implicated in this development. Are we together? Okay. I tell you what, I will send you, for next time, read Chappelle if you haven't read it. And the other thing is,